March 5th, 1902, Volume 4. The Bad Example of the Leaders. This morning I found myself outside of myself, and after going around in the search of my adorable Jesus, I found him. But to my surprise I saw that he had many thorns stuck inside his feet, under his soles, which gave him pain and prevented him from walking. All afflicted, he threw himself into my arms, almost wanting to find rest and to have those thorns taken out by me. I clasped him to myself and said to him, "My sweet love, had you come in the past days, you would not have so many thorns stuck inside of you. At the most, as some would stick, I would have pulled them out at once. This is what you have done by not coming." And while saying this, I kept pulling all those thorns out, while blood gushed from the feet of blessed Jesus, and he agonized for the strong pain. After this, as though cheered, he also wanted to pour, and then he told me, "My daughter, what corruption among the peoples! How crooked the paths they follow! But it is the bad example of the leaders that has influenced this, when for one who possesses any slightest authority, a spirit of disinterest must be his light, so as to be distinguished as a leader, and the justice exercised by him must be like a thunderbolt striking the eyes of bystanders, in such a way that they may not be able to move away from him and from his examples." Having said this, he disappeared. March 5th, 1903, Volume 4. The Crosses of Disillusion. As I was in my usual state, I found myself together with blessed Jesus, who was carrying a bundle of crosses and of thorns in his arms, all tired and weary. On seeing him in that state, I said, "Lord, why weary yourself so much with this bundle in your arms?" And he, "My daughter, these are the crosses of disillusion, which I keep always ready to disillusion the creatures." As he was saying this, we found ourselves in the midst of people, and as soon as blessed Jesus would see that someone would become attached to creatures, he would take the cross of persecution from that bundle and would give it to him. And that person, seeing himself persecuted, unpopular, would be disillusioned and would comprehend that those were the creatures, and that God alone deserves to be loved. If someone would become attached to riches, he would take from that bundle the cross of poverty and would give it to him. And that person, seeing that riches had vanished away from him and he was now poor, would comprehend that everything down here is smoke, and that true riches are eternal, and so he would attach his heart to everything that is eternal. If someone else would become bound to his self-esteem, to knowledge, blessed Jesus, with all sweetness, would take the cross of slanders and of confusions and would give it to him. And that person, confused and slandered, would remove as though a mask from himself and comprehend his own nothingness, his being, and would order his whole interior in the order of God, and no longer of himself. And so on with all the other crosses. After this, my adorable Jesus told me, "Have you seen the reason why I have this bundle of crosses in my arms? It is my love for creatures that forces me to keep it, remaining in continuous attitude for them. In fact, the cross is the primary disillusion and the first thing that judges the works of creatures, in such a way that if the creature surrenders, the cross will make him avoid the judgment of God, as I am satisfied when one submits to the judgment of the cross during his life. If then he does not surrender, He will find himself in the sphere of the second judgment at his death, and will be judged with much more severe rigor by God, more so since he has shunned the judgment of the cross, which is a judgment all of love. After this he disappeared, and I also comprehended that it is true that Jesus loves the cross, but many times it is man himself that incites and provokes Jesus to give him the cross. In fact, if man were ordered in the order of God, of himself and of creatures, not seeing any disorder in him, the Lord would remain at peace and would give him peace. March 5th, 1904, Volume 6. The cross is citation, advocate, and judge of the soul, so that she may take possession of the eternal kingdom. This morning I was feeling in much suffering, with the addition of his privation. And then after I struggled very much, he came for just a few instants and told me, "My daughter's sufferings, crosses, are like many citations which I send to souls. If the soul accepts these citations, whether they are citations that notify the soul to pay some debt, or it is a notification to obtain some gain for eternal life, if the soul responds to me by resigning herself to my will, by thanking me, by adoring my holy dispositions, we are immediately in accord, and the soul will avoid many inconveniences that are possible, like being cited again, having advocates involved, going through the suit, and receiving the condemnation of the judge. Responding to the citation with resignation and with thanksgiving alone will make up for all of this, because the cross will be citation, advocate, and judge for her, with nothing else needed for her to take possession of the eternal kingdom. If then she does not accept these citations, think about it yourself, into how many abysses of disgraces and troubles she throws herself, and what the rigor of the judge will be in condemning her for having shunned the cross as her judge, so much milder, more compassionate, more prone to enriching her rather than judging her, more intent on embellishing her rather than condemning her. March 5th, 1905, Volume 6, Definitions of the Cross. As I was in suffering a little more than usual, blessed Jesus came for a little and told me, "My daughter, the cross is support of the weak. It is strength of the strong. It is seed and custody of virginity." Having said this, he disappeared. March 5th, 1906, Volume 7. Jesus asks her to give him relief. She sees a man committing suicide. Continuing in my usual state, I found myself outside of myself with baby Jesus, all afflicted. In seeing him so afflicted, I said, "My dear little one, tell me, what do you want? That I suffer in order to relieve you?" And he placed himself with his face to the ground, praying, almost wanting me to interpret his will, but I could not understand anything. I raised him from the ground. I kissed him several times, and I said, "My beloved, I cannot understand what you want. Do you want me to suffer the crucifixion?" And he, "No." He took my arm with his hand, and my wrist appeared from the cuff of my shirt. In seeing this, I said, "Do you want me to be stripped?" "I feel great repugnance, but for love of you I submit myself." In the meantime I saw a man who, taken by desperation and by esteem of his own self, was committing suicide. And this in our town. The baby told me, "I cannot contain so much bitterness. Receive part of it." And he poured a little bit of bitterness into my mouth. I ran to that man to help him to repent of the evil he had done. The demons were taking that soul, placing it on the fire, and turning it over and over again as if they were roasting it. I freed him as many as 2 times, and then I found myself inside myself, praying the Lord to have mercy on that unfortunate soul. Blessed Jesus came back with the crown of thorns, so sunken into his head that the thorns appeared even inside his mouth. And he told me, "Ah, my daughter, yet many do not believe that the thorns penetrated even into my mouth. The sin of pride is so awful as to be the poison of the soul. It kills it. Just as one who has something across his mouth prevents any food from passing into his body to give him life, so does pride prevent the life of God in the soul. This is why I wanted to suffer so much, because of human pride. And in spite of this, the creature reaches such pride that, drunk with pride, he loses the knowledge of himself and reaches the point of killing his body and soul. To obey, I say that when I told Father what I have written above, he assured me that on that morning a man had committed suicide. March 5th, 1927, Volume 21, How Firmness in Good is Only of God. For once he has done an act, it never ceases. Effects of firmness. How the humanity of our Lord was bond of times, remedy and model. How God wants the rights of the divine will in safety. I felt myself at the summit of affliction because of the privation of my sweet Jesus, and in my interior I was saying to him, "My love and my life, how can this be? You have departed from me without saying goodbye, without teaching me where to move my steps, or the way I must follow in order to find you. Even more, it seems to me that you yourself have barricaded the ways so as not to be found. And as much as I may go around and call you, you do not listen to me. The ways are closed, and I, exhausted with tiredness, am forced to stop, and I long for him whom I wish to find at any cost, but I do not find. Ah, Jesus, Jesus, come back. Come to she who cannot live without you." But while I was pouring out my sorrow, he just barely moved in my interior, and I, in feeling him move, said to him, "My Jesus, my life, how can you make me wait for so long, to the point that I can bear no more? If you make yourself seen, it is just flashes, and without saying anything to me. And so it becomes darker than before, and I remain in restlessness even more, and raving with sorrow. I search for you, I call you, but I wait for you in vain." And Jesus, compassionating me, told me, "My daughter, do not fear. I am here with you. What I want is that you never go out of my will, and that you continue your acts always, without ever moving from the boundaries of the kingdom of the supreme Fiat. And this will give you the firmness that will make you be like your Creator, for once he has done an act, that act has continuous life without ever ceasing. An act ever continuous is only of God, who suffers no interruption in his acts. This is why our firmness is unshakable, and extending everywhere with our immensity, it renders our acts uninterrupted. And whatever place we lean on, we find our firmness, and that gives us the greatest honor. It makes us known as the Supreme Being, Creator of everything, and it renders our being and our acts unshakable. In fact, whatever place we want to lean on, we find our firmness that sustains everything. My daughter, firmness is of divine nature and a divine quality, and it is right that we give this participation and quality of divine nature to one who must be daughter of our divine Fiat and must live in our kingdom. So your continuing your acts in it, without ever interrupting them, reveals that you are already in possession of the quality of our firmness. How many things firmness says! It says that the soul moves only for God. It says that she moves with reason and out of pure love, not with passion and out of self-interest. It says that she knows the good she does, and therefore she remains firm in it, without ever interrupting it. Firmness says, with indelible characters, here there is the finger of God. Therefore be firm in your acts, and you will have our divine firmness in your operating. Then after this I was continuing my acts in the supreme volition, and as I arrived at the point of following the acts of Jesus from the moment he was conceived in the womb of the Immaculate Queen, up to his death on the cross, my lovable Jesus, making himself felt again in my interior, told me, "My daughter, my humanity came upon earth as though in the middle of times, in order to reunite the past, when the fullness of my will reigned in man. In creation, everything was its own. Everywhere it had its kingdom, its operating and divine life. And I enclosed within me this fullness of my divine volition, and binding those in the present, first I made myself the model in order to form the remedies that were needed, the helps and the teachings that were necessary in order to heal them. And then I bound the posterity to the fullness of that divine will that reigned in the first times of creation. So my coming upon earth was bond of reunion of times. It was remedy in order to form this bond, so that the kingdom of the divine Fiat might return into the midst of creatures. It was model made for all, so that modeling themselves, they might be tied with the bonds formed by me. This is why, before speaking to you about my will, I spoke to you about my coming upon earth, of what I did and suffered, in order to give you the remedies and the model of my own life. Then I spoke to you about my will. It was bonds that I formed in you, and in these bonds I formed the kingdom of my will. And as sign of this, there are the many knowledges I have manifested to you about it. Its sorrow because it does not reign with all its fullness in the midst of creatures, and the goods it promises to the children of its kingdom. Then I continued to pray, and I was feeling half asleep when, all of a sudden, I heard someone speak in a loud voice within me. I paid closer attention, and I saw my beloved Jesus with his arms raised, in the act of embracing me, saying to me with powerful voice, "My daughter, I ask nothing else of you, but that you be the daughter, the mother, the sister of my will, and that you place its rights, its honor, its glory, in safety within you." And he said this with loud and powerful voice. Then lowering his voice and embracing me, he added, The reason, my daughter, for which I want the rights of my eternal fiat in safety is that I want to enclose the most holy Trinity in the soul, and only my divine will can give us the place and the glory worthy of us, and by means of it we can operate freely and lay within you all the good of creation, forming yet more beautiful things. In fact, with our will in the soul, we can do everything, while without it, we would lack the place in which to put ourselves, and in which to lay our works. So not being free, we remain in our celestial dwellings. It happens as to a king who, loving one of his subjects with excessive love, wants to descend to live in his little hovel. But he wants to be free. He wants to put royal things in the little hovel. He wants to command. He wants that subject to eat his good and delicate foods together with him. In sum, he wants to live his life of king. But the subject does not want him to put his royal things or to command, nor does he want to adapt himself to the foods of the king. The king does not feel free, and for love of freedom, he goes back to his royal palace. Wherever my will does not reign, I am not free. The human will causes continuous contrast with mine. Therefore, not having our rights in safety, we cannot reign, and so we remain in our royal palace. March 5th, 1930, Volume 28. How Jesus wants to see his fiat palpitating in the creature. How the living in it is the recall of all the acts into the divine unity. What truth means. I live always in the pain of the privation of my sweet Jesus. What a hard martyrdom! If it wasn't that his holy will has taken his place, making itself felt continuously, such that while giving me life, it keeps me always occupied and dissolved in it, I don't know how I would manage to live. But in spite of this, the many dear memories of Jesus, as I believed I would never lose sight of him, his sweet and repeated little visits, his many loving stratagems, his many surprises, such that it seemed to me that I was living more in heaven than on earth. The mere remembering this are cruel wounds that render my painful martyrdom more cruel. Ah, Jesus, Jesus, how easily you put aside and forget the one who loves you and whose martyrdom you form. And you yourself said many times that you loved me so much. Ah, Jesus, come back, for I can endure no more. But while my poor soul felt the fever, for it wanted Jesus, and raving, it uttered nonsense, my sweet Jesus moving in my interior and clasping me in his arms, almost to put an end to my nonsense, told me, "My daughter, calm yourself, calm yourself. I am here. I have not put you aside, nor is the nature of my love capable of forgetting anyone. On the contrary, I am within you to direct all your acts in my divine will, because I do not want any of your acts, even the slightest, not to be noble and divine, and not to have the seal of my divine fiat. I want to see it palpitating in all your acts. This is all my commitment, to form the first copy of the soul who must live in my divine will." Having said this, he became silent, and I continued my round in the divine fiat, wanting to gather everything that creatures have done, in order to enclose everything in the divine will. And my highest good Jesus added, My daughter, the living in my will is the recall of all the acts of creatures into the truth of it. Everything has come out from within its unity, from our single act that gives life to all acts. Therefore it is our right, by justice, that everything return to us, to recognize where they have come from. To recognize where an act comes from, who it is that releases life for so many acts, in what way and how, is the most beautiful homage to our power and wisdom, that with one single act is life of all acts. And only one who lives in my fiat, embracing everything together with it, takes everything as though in her power, and enclosing everything in that will in which she lives, she rises into our unity in order to bring us everything, and give us the true homages of all the effects of our single act. This is why, then, going around in our divine will not only gathers everything, but communicates your act to all created things, in such a way that all the heavens assume the attitude of adorations together with your adorations. The sun of loving us together with your love, the wind of glorifying us together with you. In sum, all created things feeling in my will with which they are all invested, your act that you do in it, they all assume the attitude of loving us, of adoring us, of giving us glory and thanksgivings, in such a way that we feel that in our divine fiat, the creature gives us the fullness of love, the totality of adoration, the complete glory. Therefore continue your flight in my divine will, and do not occupy yourself with anything else, because in it you have much to do. So I remained thinking about the unity of the divine will, and my sweet Jesus added, "My daughter, do you know what unity of divine will means? It means that from within this one will, there is nothing beautiful, good, and holy that does not come from within it. This one divine will of ours, one is its unity, one is its act. But while it is one, the will, the unity, and the act extend everywhere. And because it extends everywhere, as though in one single breath, it does everything. It embraces everything, and gives life to everything. So one who lives in our divine volition fuses herself in our unity, and everything she does not go out of us, but remains inside of us. On the other hand, with one who lives outside of it, we feel the pain of the tearing she causes with her acts from within our will, and while she tears them away, she does not return them to us, because our divine will is not one with hers. Hence the great difference of one who lives outside of our fiat. All of her acts are divided and broken, not fused together. Therefore she will not have the good of feeling within herself the fullness of the light, of the happiness, and of all the goods. But everything will be misery, weakness, and scarceness of light. March 5th, 1933, Volume 31. How the Human Will Reduces the Soul to Shreds and Forms the Little Disordered Citadels, without king and without defense. Weeping of Jesus. My poor mind, while it crossed the sea of the divine fiat, according to my little capacity, understood its value, its sanctity, and the great prodigy that the creature, provided she would live in it, can enclose in herself a will so holy and interminable, and become bearer and possessor of this volition so holy, that involves and encloses everything. That the great encloses the little is nothing to be wondered at, but that the little encloses the great is of the incredible, and only God can do these prodigies. Divine goodness, how admirable you are, and more than a tender and loving mother who wants to enclose herself in her child and place him in safety, and become repeater of the life of her same birth, in order to have the glory of being able to say, "The child is all similar to his mother." But while my mind was happy in the pure joys of the divine Fiat, a sad whirlwind afflicted my joys, and I understood the great evil and terrible affront that is made to God when we take the liberty of doing our will. And beloved Jesus, repeating his brief little visit, all embittered, told me, "My good daughter, the human will, it wages war on God and on itself. The weapons that it moves against its Creator wound itself, and his soul remains as a tattered body before God. Every act of human will divides him from his Creator, from his sanctity, from his strength, power, from his love and immutability. Without my divine will, the creature becomes like a besieged city that the enemies constrain to dying of hunger and torture in all its members, with this difference, that the executioners who tear its members is his own will. They are not enemies who torment him, but he makes himself his own enemy. If you knew the sorrow that I feel when I see souls torn to shreds. Every act of one's will is a division that he forms between God and himself. It is a moving away from the beauty of one's creation. It is chilling himself from the true and pure love. It is losing himself from his origin. It is preparing for himself either an anticipated hell, if the human will falls into grave evil, or purgatory, if the evil is slight. The human will is like gangrene to the body that has the virtue of making the flesh fall in shreds and of deforming the beauty of the creature. Poor souls without my divine will, because it alone has the unitive virtue that, uniting everything together, the thought, the desire, the affection, the love, the human will, gives the beautiful united form to the soul of the creature. On the other hand, without my will, the thought wants one thing, the will another, the desire wants another, the affection another. In a way that they struggle among themselves, they become entangled, they are divided. There is neither peace nor union without my will. There is lacking one who places the cement in order to reunite the divided parts and render it strong against all the evils that can rise up. Therefore your Jesus does nothing other than weep over the ruins of these more than over disordered Jerusalem, that instead of recognizing their Messiah, ignored him and gave him death. The same for my will, it becomes ignored while it is in the midst of them and in them, and they form of their souls little disordered cities that constrain me to make me repeat the threat that not a stone will remain on a stone for them, because without my will they are citadels without a king. Therefore they have neither one who protects them, nor who defends them, nor who administers to them the necessary foods, in order to do good and not let them entangle themselves in evil. And I cry over their fate, and I pray that they recognize my will, love it, and let it reign. And you pray together with me. After this, I was following the acts that my sweet Jesus did when he was on this earth, and I prayed him from the heart that, in virtue of his acts, he would make his will known to everyone. And following him on the ways that he took, my mind stopped in the act when my eternal love, Jesus, went through the fields, and he delighted in looking at the flowers and gathered them with his creative hands. And I wanted to place my I love you over each flower, so that it would change into voice and speaking flowers that would ask that his volition would be known and loved. And Jesus, making himself felt, all goodness added, "Blessed daughter, I want to tell you my sorrows and the secret of my heart. You must know that the human will was the most transfixing nail of my heart. In journeying on the roads, the fields, I looked at the fields in bloom, the trees loaded with fruits, and I felt the joys of my creation. And those fields in bloom symbolized for me more than flowers, the beauty, the vivacity, the freshness, and the beautiful complexion of the creature, and I rejoiced. But immediately the nail of the human volition made me see them transformed into withered flowers, faded, dried, drooping on the stem, in the act of dying, that instead of fragrance, changed into bad odor, and the fruits of the trees, unripe and rotten, symbol of the evil in which the human will reduces the creature, the most beautiful work of our creative hands. I had a pain. Those flowers snatched tears from my eyes, because I felt the nail of the human will penetrate more strongly. And my sorrow is very strong, because I wait for your I love you that asks me that the good of my will and the evil of the human will be known, so that they do mine and abhor theirs. Many times I looked at the azure heavens studded with stars, and the sun with its majestic shining light that dominated the whole earth, symbol of the heaven of the soul, and the sun of my will that must shine in this heaven so enchanting, that must dominate with its light the heaven of the soul and the beautiful flowered earth of their bodies. And my heart had some jolts of joy. But what? They were brief instants. Immediately the nail of the human volition went out into the field, and forming very black clouds, loaded with thunder, lightning, and hail, it obstructed the sun. It removed the beautiful sight of the serene heaven, and unloading itself over the poor creature, devastated the heaven of their soul and the earth of their bodies, casting desolation and horror everywhere. I can say that when I lived down here, I did not take a step that the nail of the human volition did not transfix me, from when I was born to when I died. It was exactly this that formed the hardest and continuous martyrdom of mine, because for me it transformed from beautiful into ugly my most beautiful creative work. And I, in everything that I did and suffered, always had the aim of placing the human will in safety. And oh, how I love one who calls my acts, unites herself together with me, and on the stake of my same sacrifice and of my love, sacrifices herself in order to obtain the great good that my will would be known and would dominate the human volition, font of all the evils of the poor creature. Therefore I want you always together with me, never leave me alone, in order to repeat my life in you. End of March 5th. Fiat.